Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the human exploration vessel Dawn's Edge as it slowly approached the massive alien space station. The station was bigger than anything humans had ever built, stretching across the dark space like a metal city floating among the stars. 3 months of careful talks had led to this moment, and now humanity was finally being invited to join the Galactic Trade Federation. Jake looked out at the alien structure and felt his heart beating faster. This was it, the moment that would change everything for the human race. They were no longer alone in the universe, and today they would meet the most advanced civilizations in this part of space. The Federation had been around for over 2,000 years, and 17 different alien species called it home. Admiral Lisa Carter stood beside him, checking her uniform one more time. She was Earth's first interstellar diplomat, chosen for this historic mission because of her calm nature and quick thinking. Behind them, the rest of the crew watched the alien station grow larger through the main viewing screen. Everyone knew how important this day was, the welcoming committee was, waiting for them at the station's docking bay. 3 different alien species had come to greet the humans, and each one looked more amazing than anything Jake had seen in movies or books. The Zephyrians were tall and made of what looked like living crystal, their bodies catching the light and throwing it back in rainbow patterns. They moved with a grace that seemed impossible, and their technology was based entirely on energy manipulation. The Cathara were completely different, looking like giant insects with multiple arms and legs. Their exoskeletons were dark and shiny, and they clicked and buzzed when they communicated with each other. These aliens had mastered the ability to change matter at the molecular level, which meant they could basically rearrange atoms to create whatever they needed. The third species was the most mysterious. The Nexari looked almost human, but seemed to glow with a faint light that came from within their bodies. They had developed powerful psychic abilities over thousands of years, and they could communicate through thoughts alone. Just being near them made Jake feel slightly dizzy, as if someone was gently touching his mind. Admiral Carter led the human delegation off their ship and onto the alien station. The gravity felt slightly different, and the air had a strange metallic taste that reminded Jake of copper pennies. The welcoming ceremony was formal but friendly, with each alien species presenting gifts and sharing traditional greetings through their universal translators. The tour of the station began immediately after the ceremony. The aliens seemed eager to show off their technology, and Jake had to admit he was impressed. They walked through corridors that seemed to bend and reshape themselves as they moved, past rooms where Cathara scientists were creating new materials out of thin air, and through chambers where Nexari diplomats were having silent conversations using only their minds. Commander Rick Thompson, the ship's military advisor, had been asked to demonstrate human weapons technology as part of the cultural exchange. He had brought examples of their best equipment, including plasma rifles that could cut through thick metal, energy shields that could stop most attacks, and advanced targeting systems that could hit targets from incredible distances. The aliens watched with polite interest as Rick explained how each weapon worked. They nodded and asked questions through their translators, and Jake started to feel proud of what humanity had accomplished. Their technology might not be as advanced as the Federation's, but it was still impressive. Then Rick mentioned their backup weapons, the kinetic firearms that every human soldier carried just in case their main weapons failed. He pulled out a standard assault rifle and a handful of bullets, explaining how they used chemical explosives to propel metal projectiles at high speed. The reaction was immediate and humiliating. The Zephyrian commander, who had introduced himself as Veltar, began to vibrate with what the translator indicated was laughter. His crystal body chimed like wind chimes in a storm, and the sound filled the entire room. The Cathara delegate started clicking her mandibles in a pattern that clearly meant she was amused, while the Nexari representative's glow brightened in what seemed to be psychic laughter. Veltar spoke through the translator, his voice carrying clear amusement. "You still propel primitive metal fragments through chemical explosions? How wonderfully antiquated. We have not seen such technology in over 15 centuries. It is like watching children play with wooden swords." The other aliens joined in. The mockery, sharing stories of their own species' ancient histories when they had used similar weapons. They talked about bullets the way humans might discuss stone axes or bronze spears, as interesting artifacts from a less civilized time. Several aliens asked to examine the bullets more closely, passing them around like curious trinkets, while their advanced scanners analyzed the simple lead and copper construction. During the diplomatic dinner that evening, the teasing continued. Federation species told humorous stories about their primitive bullet phase and treated human military technology like exhibits in a museum. The aliens were not cruel, but their amusement was clear and constant. They seemed to view humanity as the backward relatives who had finally been invited to join the family. Admiral Carter maintained her diplomatic smile throughout the evening, but Jake could see the frustration in her eyes. The message was obvious. Humanity was being welcomed into the Federation, but only as junior members who needed to catch up with the rest of civilized space. Their technology was tolerated, their potential was acknowledged, but their current capabilities were seen as charmingly outdated. When the humans finally returned to their quarters that night, the mood was somber. They had achieved their goal of joining the Federation, but the cost to their pride had been higher than expected. Jake looked out at the alien station through his window and made a silent promise. Someday, somehow, humanity would prove that they deserved respect, not just tolerance. The universe was about to learn that sometimes the old ways survived for very good reasons. 3 weeks had passed since the embarrassing welcome ceremony, and now Captain Jake Morrison found himself commanding a joint training exercise in the asteroid belt around Proxima Centauri. The Federation had built a massive military testing ground here, where new member species could prove their worth in combat situations. It was supposed to be their chance to show what humans could really do. The test facility was enormous, floating in space between the rocky asteroids like a dark metal fortress. Jake studied the structure through his ship's sensors and felt his stomach tighten. This was not going to be easy. The fortress was equipped with the most advanced Federation technology, including energy barriers that could stop plasma weapons and molecular disruptors that could break down almost any known material. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez sat at the tactical station, her fingers dancing across the control panels as she analyzed the challenge ahead. Her job was to figure out how they could possibly succeed where so many others had failed. The mission seemed impossible: infiltrate the heavily defended fortress, disable its shield generators, and steal important intelligence while under constant attack from adaptive artificial intelligence defenders. The fortress AI was called Guardian, and it had been programmed with combat data from thousands of different species. It could learn from each attack and develop countermeasures within minutes. Every weapon type, every tactical approach, every strategy used by Federation members had been fed into its memory banks. It was designed to be unbeatable. Amy pulled up the records of previous attempts and shook her head. The Vorthak, a warrior, race famous for their brutal fighting style, had lasted only 18 minutes before their entire assault team was eliminated. The Cylons, who were known throughout the galaxy for their advanced technology, had managed 37 minutes before their systems were completely overwhelmed by the Guardians' adaptive responses. The current record holder was the Drakmor Empire, a militaristic civilization that had spent centuries perfecting their warfare techniques. They had actually managed to break through the fortress's outer defenses and fight their way inside, lasting a full 2 hours before the Guardians' learning algorithms finally defeated them. It was considered an impressive achievement, and no species since then had come close to matching it. Jake looked at his team and felt both pride and worry. Sergeant Dan Williams was a former Marine Corps sniper who could hit targets from distances that amazed even the aliens. Lieutenant Kate Johnson was an explosives expert who understood how to destroy things in ways that surprised everyone. Chief Engineer Paul Davis had spent weeks studying Federation technology, trying to find weaknesses that others had missed. The Federation observers had gathered to watch the human attempt, and Jake could see them through the communication screens. Commander Zixara, the Zephyrian military advisor who had laughed so hard at their bullets, was openly making bets with his colleagues about how quickly the humans would fail. The general consensus seemed to be that humanity would set a new record for fastest defeat. Jake made a decision that puzzled everyone watching. He ordered his team to carry their standard Federation-approved plasma weapons and energy shields, but he also told them to bring their kinetic weapons as backups. The alien observers immediately began commenting among themselves, their translators picking up words like primitive, outdated, and cultural attachment. Zixara's crystalline body chimed with amusement as he spoke to his fellow officers. Look at them clinging to their ancient projectile weapons. It would be charming if it were not so pathetic. They will discover soon enough that modern warfare has no place for such relics. The Dawn's Edge approached the fortress slowly, its sensors scanning for weaknesses while the automated defense systems came online. Immediately, energy weapons began targeting their ship from multiple directions. The shields held, but Jake could see the power levels dropping rapidly. They would not last long under this kind of assault. The boarding party prepared for their mission in the ship's armory. Don Williams checked his plasma rifle one more time, then secured his modified M4 carbine to his back. Kate Johnson loaded her energy weapons power cells while also making sure her shotgun was properly loaded with specialized armor-piercing rounds. Paul Davis calibrated his precision instruments while keeping his custom rifle within easy reach. The Federation observers watched these preparations with a mixture of curiosity and condescension. To them, the humans looked like soldiers going into battle with both modern equipment and museum pieces. They could not understand why anyone would burden themselves with such outdated technology when superior alternatives were available. Jake gave the final mission briefing as their ship moved into position. The plan was straightforward: breach the fortress hull, fight their way to the shield generators, disable them, and then reach the central intelligence core. Simple in concept, but incredibly difficult in execution, especially against an AI that could adapt to any strategy. The Guardian AI was already analyzing their approach, running calculations based on standard Federation tactics. It had defeated 17 different species using these same methods, and it was confident that the humans would provide no new challenges. After all, they were the newest and least advanced members of the Federation. As the boarding pods launched toward the fortress, Jake felt a grim satisfaction. The aliens thought they knew what humans were capable of, but they were about to learn something important. Sometimes being underestimated was the greatest advantage of all. The fortress's defense systems activated fully as the human pods approached. Energy barriers flared to life, automated turrets began tracking targets, and the Guardian AI prepared to add another species to its list of defeated opponents. The test was about to begin, and everyone expected it to be over quickly. But Jake Morrison had not told his Federation observers everything about human military doctrine. There were aspects of human warfare that no other species had ever encountered, tactics that existed nowhere in the Guardian's vast database. The aliens were about to discover that their newest members had been holding back during the welcome demonstrations. The Dawn's Edge crew was ready to show the galaxy what humans could really do when they stopped trying to impress anyone and started fighting to win. The boarding pods slammed into the fortress hull with loud metallic crashes that echoed through the corridors. Sergeant Dan Williams was the first one out, his plasma rifle ready as he cut through the thick metal barrier. Sparks flew everywhere as the cutting beam sliced through the advanced alloy, but the human equipment worked perfectly, creating a hole large enough for the team to enter. The inside of the fortress was dark and cold, with strange blue lights running along the walls, like glowing veins. The air tasted metallic and sharp, and every surface seemed to hum with electrical energy. Don led the team forward, his weapon scanning for threats while his boots made soft sounds on the metal floor. The Guardian AI immediately detected their presence and activated the first wave of defenses. Security drones dropped from hidden panels in the ceiling, their energy weapons charging up with high-pitched whines. The humans took cover behind metal supports and began firing their plasma rifles, filling the corridor with bright flashes of superheated energy. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez coordinated the attack from her position behind a thick support beam. Her plasma rifle sent bolt after bolt of energy at the security drones, and several of them exploded in showers of sparks and metal fragments. The other team members spread out and began systematically destroying the automated defenders, their Federation-approved weapons working exactly as expected, but the Guardian AI was learning with each passing minute. It analyzed every energy signature, every weapon discharge, every tactical movement the humans made. The artificial intelligence had access to combat data from thousands of battles, and it began making adjustments to counter the human attack patterns. Within 20 minutes, the plasma rifles started becoming less effective. The security drones began deploying energy shields that could deflect the human weapons, and the fortress automated system started generating interference that disrupted the plasma bolts. The Guardian was doing exactly what it had been designed to do: adapt and overcome. The Federation observers watched through their advanced sensors, and Commander Zixara nodded with satisfaction. His crystalline body chimed softly as he spoke to his colleagues. As predicted, their energy weapons are being neutralized by the Guardian's adaptive systems. They should surrender now before the AI switches to lethal countermeasures. But Captain, Jake Morrison had expected this to happen. He had studied the records of previous attempts and noticed that every single species had made the same mistake. They had relied entirely on their most advanced weapons, and when those weapons were countered, they had no backup plan. Jake had prepared for this moment. He activated his communication system and spoke calmly to his team. Switch to kinetic backup. The order surprised everyone, including the human team members. But they had trained for this scenario, and they immediately began switching to their secondary weapons. Don Williams slung his plasma rifle over his shoulder and drew his modified M4 carbine, checking the magazine to make sure it was fully loaded with armor-piercing rounds. Lieutenant Kate Johnson put down her energy weapon and pulled out her combat shotgun, loading it with specialized ammunition that had been designed by Earth's best military engineers. Chief Engineer Paul Davis secured his plasma rifle and took out his precision rifle, its scope already calibrated for the fortress environment. The Federation observers watched in confusion as the humans abandoned their advanced weapons for what they considered primitive alternatives. The alien military leaders began commenting among themselves, their translators picking up words of disbelief and concern about human tactical judgment. The Guardian AI immediately began scanning the new weapons, trying to understand what it was dealing with. Its vast database contained detailed information about energy weapons, plasma technology, molecular disruptors, and thousands of other advanced armaments. But kinetic projectiles propelled by chemical explosives were something different entirely. The AI found references to such weapons in the historical records of various species, but they were all ancient, dating back over 1,000 years. No civilized species had used them in actual combat for centuries. The Guardian began running calculations, trying to determine the best countermeasures, but something unprecedented happened. Don Williams fired a 3-round burst from his rifle, and the bullets punched through the security drone's energy shield like it was made of paper. The drone exploded in a shower of sparks, its advanced systems completely unable to cope with the simple kinetic impact. The Guardian's repair systems, designed to heal energy damage, could not fix the physical holes torn through the drone's hull. Kate Johnson's shotgun blast tore apart a shield generator that had been deflecting plasma fire for the past hour. The spread of pellets overwhelmed the generator's defensive systems, which had been designed to handle concentrated energy attacks, not multiple projectiles hitting from different angles at the same time. Paul Davis used his precision rifle to destroy a communications array from long range, the bullet traveling faster than the fortress systems could track. The Guardian tried to predict the shot based on energy weapon patterns, but kinetic projectiles followed completely different rules of physics. The fortress AI began calculating frantically, but the damage was already spreading. Its energy shields, which had been nearly impervious to plasma weapons, offered no protection against solid matter moving at high velocity. The molecular disruptors that could break down sophisticated materials could not process the simple lead and copper bullets fast enough to stop them. The Federation observers fell silent as they watched the impossible happen. The humans were advancing deeper into the fortress, their primitive weapons proving devastatingly effective against defenses that had stopped the galaxy's most advanced military forces. The Guardian AI, for the first time in its existence, was struggling to adapt to a threat it did not understand. Commander Zixara's crystalline body had stopped chiming, and his energy patterns showed confusion and growing alarm. The other alien observers were making rapid calculations, trying to understand how weapons they had dismissed as obsolete could be so effective against their most sophisticated defenses. Jake Morrison allowed himself a small smile as he watched the tactical display. The plan was working perfectly, but this was only the beginning. The real test would come when they reached the fortress core, where the Guardian AI would have time to fully analyze their weapons and develop proper countermeasures. The humans pressed forward, their kinetic weapons clearing a path through defenses that had seemed impossible to breach. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective ones. The human team pushed deeper into the fortress, their kinetic weapons cutting through defenses like a hot knife through butter. The Guardian AI was becoming increasingly desperate as its sophisticated systems failed to stop the simple bullets. Every calculation it made seemed wrong. Every countermeasure it deployed proved useless against the humans. Primitive Technology. Chief Engineer Paul Davis made a crucial discovery as they moved through the fortress corridors. He had been studying the defensive systems while the team fought, and he realized something that no other species had ever figured out. The entire fortress was designed around one basic assumption, that attackers would use energy-based weapons like plasma rifles, molecular disruptors, or particle beams. Paul spoke into his communication device while reloading his rifle. The AI has been programmed with thousands of years of combat data, but all of it involves advanced technology. It literally cannot understand why our bullets work so well because no Federation species has used them in living memory. The Guardian AI was trying everything it could think of to stop the human advance. It deployed energy barriers that had stopped the most powerful plasma weapons, but the bullets punched through them without slowing down. It activated molecular disruptors that could break down the most sophisticated materials. But the simple lead and copper projectiles were too basic for the system to process effectively. Sergeant Don Williams moved through the fortress like a ghost, his rifle picking off targets with deadly precision. The Guardian kept trying to predict his movements based on energy weapon tactics, but kinetic weapons followed completely different rules. Don could fire around corners using ricochet shots, something that was impossible with plasma weapons. He could penetrate multiple targets with a single bullet, overwhelming the AI's damage control systems. The Guardian began creating physical barriers instead of energy shields, but these were hastily constructed and poorly designed. The AI had no experience with ballistic trajectories, muzzle velocities, or the simple physics of high-velocity projectiles. It tried to build walls thick enough to stop bullets, but the humans simply found ways around them or used explosive rounds to blast through them. Lieutenant Kate Johnson demonstrated the versatility of human kinetic weapons when they encountered a heavily reinforced door. The portal had been designed to resist plasma cutters and energy weapons, its surface covered with energy-absorbing materials and defensive systems. Kate loaded her shotgun with breaching rounds and fired at the door's hinges. The spread pattern of the pellets overwhelmed the door's reinforcement systems, which had been designed to handle concentrated energy attacks from a single point. The multiple impacts from different angles caused the entire defensive grid to collapse, and the door fell inward with a loud crash. The Guardian AI watched in confusion as centuries of defensive engineering were defeated by a handful of metal pellets. Paul Davis used his precision rifle to systematically destroy the fortress's sensor arrays and communication nodes. The AI had positioned these systems based on energy weapon ranges and expected attack patterns, but kinetic weapons could reach targets that plasma rifles could never hit. Paul's optical scope, a simple piece of glass and metal, proved more effective than most advanced targeting computers. The Guardian tried to jam the human weapons by interfering with their electronic systems, but kinetic weapons had very few electronic components. The rifles worked through simple mechanical actions and chemical reactions that could not be disrupted by electronic warfare. The AI's sophisticated jamming systems were useless against technology that operated on basic physical principles. The Federation observers watched in growing amazement as the humans accomplished what no other species had managed. They were systematically dismantling the fortress's defenses using weapons that everyone had considered obsolete. The mockery and condescension from the previous weeks had transformed into stunned silence. Commander Zixara, who had been so confident in his species' technological superiority, found himself making desperate calculations. The Zephyrians had eliminated kinetic weapons from their arsenal over 2,000 years ago, considering them crude and inefficient. Now he watched as these primitive weapons destroyed defenses that had stopped their most advanced attacks. The other alien observers began frantically reviewing their own military doctrines. The Kithara delegate was analyzing how human bullets could penetrate their molecular barriers. The Nexari representative was trying to understand how kinetic weapons could be coordinated without telepathic communication. Every species was realizing that they might have made a terrible mistake in abandoning older technologies. The Guardian AI attempted one final desperate strategy. It began using the fortress's own mass against the humans, creating choke points, and attempting to overwhelm them with superior numbers. Dozens of security drones poured into the corridors, their energy weapons firing constantly while repair systems worked to fix the damage caused by human bullets, but the AIS adaptations came too late. The humans had already penetrated too deeply into the fortress, and their kinetic weapons continued to prove effective against every defense. Don Williams used his rifle to create firing lanes, shooting through multiple drones with single bullets. Kate Johnson's shotgun cleared entire corridors with devastating efficiency. Paul Davis provided cover fire that kept the AIS repair systems from functioning properly. Captain Jake Morrison monitored the situation from the Dawn's Edge, watching as his team advanced through areas that had stopped the galaxy's most advanced warriors. The tactical display showed the humans were now only 3 levels away from the fortress core. Having advanced further than any previous species in the history of the training ground, thought the plan was working perfectly. But Jake knew the real test was still ahead. The fortress core would be where the Guardian AI made its final stand, and it would have learned enough about human tactics to mount a more effective defense. The question was whether their kinetic weapons would be enough to overcome the AIS' most sophisticated countermeasures. The humans pressed forward, their primitive bullets continuing to tear through defenses that had been designed to stop the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. The siege was unraveling, and the Guardian AI was running out of options to stop the relentless human advance. The human team reached the fortress core after 4 hours of continuous fighting, completely shattering the previous record held by the Drakmor Empire. The central chamber was enormous, filled with glowing control panels and massive energy conduits that pulsed with electric power. This was where the Guardian AI had concentrated its most powerful defenses, and the room buzzed with the sound of charging weapons and humming force fields. The Guardian AI had learned enough about kinetic weapons during the past 4 hours to finally mount a more effective defense. It had analyzed thousands of bullet impacts, studied the humans' movement patterns, and calculated the physics of projectile warfare. The AI was no longer confused by the primitive technology, and it was ready to make its final stand. Sergeant Don Williams crouched behind a metal support beam and carefully studied the defensive grid ahead of them. The Guardian had created a maze of energy barriers, automated turrets, and sophisticated countermeasures that filled the entire chamber. For the first time since the mission began, the human team faced defenses that seemed specifically designed to stop their kinetic weapons. The AI had learned to predict bullet trajectories and created energy fields that could deflect projectiles instead of trying to absorb them. It had positioned physical barriers at calculated angles to cause ricochets that would send bullets harmlessly into the walls. The automated turrets were programmed to track the humans' movement patterns and fire preemptively at locations where they were likely to take cover. Lieutenant Kate Johnson tested the defenses with a few shotgun blasts, but the pellets were deflected by the energy barriers or absorbed by specially designed impact plates. The Guardian had finally adapted to human tactics, and for a moment it seemed like the AI had found a way to stop their advance. The Federation observers began to relax slightly. Thinking that superior technology would ultimately prevail, Chief Engineer Paul Davis studied the defensive setup while the team regrouped. He could see that the Guardian had learned from its mistakes and created a system that could actually counter kinetic weapons. The AI had used its vast computational power to solve the ballistics problem, and now it was applying that solution with deadly efficiency, but Captain Jake Morrison had prepared for this exact scenario. He had studied the records of every species that had attempted this challenge, and he had noticed that they all made the same critical error. When their primary tactics failed, they either retreated or tried to force their way through using brute strength. No species had ever tried true coordination. Jake activated his communication system and spoke calmly to his team. Implement protocol. Omega. The order sent a chill through the Federation observers because they had no idea what Protocol Omega meant. They had been monitoring human communications throughout the entire mission, but this was the first time they had heard this designation. The alien military leaders began making frantic calculations, trying to understand what the humans were planning. Dan Williams, Kate Johnson, and Paul Davis immediately understood what they needed to do. They had trained for this scenario during their preparation, but none of them had expected to actually use it. Protocol Omega was something that no other species would even consider because it required a level of coordination that seemed impossible without telepathic communication. The three humans spread out to different positions around the chamber, each one targeting a different section of the Guardian's central defense grid. The AI immediately began tracking their movements, its systems calculating firing solutions for 3 separate targets. But the Guardian was still thinking in terms of individual threats. The way every other species had attacked, Don took position behind a power conduit and aimed his rifle at the primary energy distribution node. Kate moved to the opposite side of the chamber and loaded her shotgun with armor-piercing rounds, targeting the main processing core. Paul found an elevated position and focused his precision rifle on the AIS communication array. The Guardian AI was confused by their positioning because it did not make tactical sense according to standard Federation doctrine. The humans were not concentrating their firepower on a single target, and they were not providing covering fire for each other. Instead, they were isolating themselves in positions where they could not support one another if the AI counterattacked, but Jake Morrison was counting on the AIS confusion. The Guardian had been programmed with combat data from thousands of battles, but all of that data involved species that fought in predictable patterns. Energy weapons required concentration of fire to be effective, so every species attacked the same way. The AI had never encountered an attack that relied on perfect timing instead of overwhelming firepower. Jake gave the signal, and all 3 humans fired simultaneously. The Guardian AI, programmed to handle individual threats, could not process the coordination required to stop 3 separate kinetic attacks from different angles at the same time. Its computational systems overloaded as it tried to calculate solutions to 3 different ballistics problems occurring in the same instant. The energy barriers flickered and failed as the system struggled to redirect power to multiple defensive points. The AIS response time, which had been measured in milliseconds, suddenly stretched to several seconds as it tried to prioritize threats. The bullets from 3 different weapons struck their targets within microseconds of each other, creating a cascade failure throughout the entire defensive grid. Dan's rifle rounds punched through the energy distribution node, causing power fluctuations throughout the chamber. Kate's shotgun blast tore apart the main processing core, disrupting the AIS ability to coordinate its defenses. Paul's precision shot destroyed the communication array, cutting off the Guardian's connection to the fortress's external systems. The fortress core erupted in showers of sparks and electrical explosions as the Guardian AIS most sophisticated defenses collapsed under the coordinated attack. The humans had achieved something that no other species had even attempted. They had overwhelmed the AI's ability to process multiple simultaneous threats. The Guardian made one final desperate attempt to stop the human advance, but its systems were failing too rapidly. The AI's learning algorithms, which had been its greatest strength, now worked against it as it tried to process too much information at once. The coordination of the human attack had created a feedback loop that the AI could not escape. Jake Morrison watched the tactical display as his team breached the fortress core in a spectacular display of coordinated firepower. Their bullets punched through the central processing unit, destroying the Guardian AI and completing the exercise that had defeated every other species in the galaxy. The fortress powered down, its defenses finally overwhelmed by the same primitive technology that the Federation had mocked just weeks earlier. The mission timer showed 4 hours and 17 minutes, more than doubling the previous record. The silence from the Federation observers was deafening as they struggled to understand what they had just witnessed. The aftermath of the exercise sent shockwaves through the entire Federation military establishment. Admiral Lisa Carter found herself suddenly very popular as requests for meetings poured in from species that had barely acknowledged humanity's existence just weeks earlier. The condescending attitudes and patronizing comments had been replaced by genuine interest and, in some cases, barely concealed concern about what humans might be capable of. Commander Zixara approached Captain Jake Morrison with a mixture of respect and confusion that was obvious even through the universal translator. His crystalline body had lost its earlier musical quality, and his energy patterns showed the alien equivalent of nervousness. The Zephyrian military advisor, who had been so confident in his species' technological superiority, now seemed unsure of everything he had believed about modern warfare. "Your kinetic weapons?" Zixara said, his voice carrying none of its previous amusement. "We had dismissed them as primitive relics from a less civilized age. But their effectiveness against our most advanced defenses was completely unexpected. How did you know they would work when our energy weapons failed?" Jake exchanged a look with his crew before responding. The question was simple, but the answer revealed something fundamental about human nature that the aliens had never understood. We did not abandon kinetic weapons because they were primitive. We kept them because they work. Sometimes the simplest solution is the most effective one, and effectiveness matters more than sophistication. The Kithara delegate, who had been so amused by human chemical explosions just weeks earlier, now approached with urgent requests for detailed technical specifications about human ammunition. Her insectoid features showed intense interest as she studied the spent bullet casings that the humans had brought back from the fortress. The alien who had once mocked human technology now wanted to understand every aspect of how it worked. The Nexari representative, whose psychic abilities had seemed so advanced compared to human limitations, was equally fascinated by a different aspect of the human victory. He wanted to understand how the humans had coordinated their final attack without telepathic communication. The concept of perfect timing achieved through training and trust, rather than mind-to-mind contact, was completely foreign to his species. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez presented the official tactical analysis to a room full of Federation military leaders. Her presentation was clinical and professional, but the implications were revolutionary. She showed how every species in the Federation had made the same critical mistake by assuming that technological advancement meant abandoning older methods entirely. The Guardian AI had detailed information about every weapon system used by Federation species over the past 1,000 years, Amy explained, pointing to charts and graphs that showed the AI's adaptation patterns. But it had no recent combat data about kinetic weapons because no civilization had used them in active warfare for centuries. This created a blind spot in its programming that we were able to exploit. The Federation military leaders listened in stunned silence as Amy continued her analysis. She showed how their sophisticated defenses had been specifically designed to counter energy-based attacks, leaving them vulnerable to simpler solutions. The energy barriers that could deflect plasma bolts were useless against solid projectiles. The molecular disruptors that could break down advanced materials could not process simple lead and copper fast enough to stop them. The Federation's military doctrine underwent immediate and dramatic review. For the first time in over a millennium, member species began researching kinetic weapons technology. The Zephyrians, despite their energy-based biology, started developing projectile systems that could work with their crystalline physiology. The Kithara began experimenting with molecular-level bullet construction, using their matter manipulation abilities to create projectiles that no other species could match. Even the Nexari, who had relied on psychic warfare for thousands of years, began exploring the possibility of mentally guided projectiles. The concept of combining their telepathic abilities with kinetic weapons opened up tactical possibilities that had never been considered before. But the humans maintained their advantage because they had never abandoned the fundamentals. Earth's military industries, which had been considered quaint curiosities during the first contact ceremonies, suddenly became some of the most valuable assets in the galaxy. Human weapons manufacturers received contracts from species across known space, and the technology that had been mocked as wooden swords now represented a significant military advantage. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Dawn's Edge as they prepared to depart the training station. The same Federation representatives who had laughed at human bullets now watched the human ship with a mixture of respect and wariness. The galaxy had learned an important lesson about the dangers of dismissing something simply because it seemed outdated or primitive. Admiral Carter transmitted her final report to Earth Command, her voice carrying satisfaction and pride. Mission accomplished. Humanity has earned its place in the Federation, not as the backward cousins who need to catch up with civilized space, but as the species that reminded the galaxy that effectiveness matters more than sophistication. The aliens mocked our bullets, but they will not make that mistake again. The Dawn's Edge engaged its hyperdrive and jumped toward home, carrying news of humanity's first major diplomatic and military victory among the stars. Behind them, the Federation began the long and difficult process of relearning lessons they had forgotten centuries earlier. The training exercise had revealed fundamental flaws in their military thinking that would take years to correct. In the weeks that followed, human military advisors were requested by multiple Federation species. The tactics that had once been dismissed as primitive were now studied and analyzed by the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. Training programs were developed to teach Federation officers how to coordinate attacks without telepathic communication. Research projects were launched to understand the physics of kinetic weapons and how they could be integrated into modern warfare. The story ended with a scene that would be repeated countless times across Federation space. A young alien officer, training with a newly issued kinetic weapon, asked his instructor about the humans who had changed everything. The instructor, a veteran who had witnessed the fortress exercise, responded with words that would become legendary throughout the galaxy. They taught us that progress is not about abandoning what works. It is about knowing when to use it. The humans never forgot that the goal of warfare is victory, not technological superiority. Sometimes the most advanced solution is the one that simply works, and humanity reminded us all that there is nothing primitive about winning. The galaxy had learned to respect the species that carried bullets, and that respect would never be forgotten.